All right. Welcome again to season one, episode one of the Blunt Force Conservative Podcast. We had two great guests today, and after recording the entire session, we thought it was going a little bit long. So we're going to divide it into part one and part two. Part one, of course, is Gary Heasley from the Conservative Voice, and part two is retired FBI Executive Assistant Director Chris Peyotta. So welcome to part two of episode one of the Blunt Force Conservative Podcast. I hope you enjoy it. All right, welcome back to season one, episode one of the Blunt Force Conservative Podcast. I am Chris Hinkle, your retired FBI agent, your Blunt Force Conservative, or as I'm known on local radio down here in Mississippi, your G-man on the wall. I'd like to welcome the guy I've gotten to be friends with here recently in the past year, and it's Chris Peyotta. Chris is a retired FBI Executive Assistant Director. That's one of the highest levels that you can get into the FBI outside of the Deputy Director and the Director himself. Chris is an author. He has a book out there, Wanted, the FBI I once knew. And we served roughly about the same time in the FBI. He just took more of a career trajectory going up than I did. I had my taste of management as a field desk supervisor, and oh my gosh, I think that and ASAC is probably the two worst positions in the FBI, just based on what I see. But Chris, welcome to the Blunt Force Conservative Podcast. What have you got going on down there? Now you're located in Florida?
Yeah, I'm outside of Pensacola, Florida. It's a great sunny day here, and got a house full of guests because my oldest granddaughter just graduated from high school. So it's
Wow,
been a full,
you don't
yeah,
look
it's a
old
full
enough to have a
weekend.
granddaughter graduating from high school.
Unfortunately, I am. So it's a reality. So yeah, it's been a busy weekend on this end, and thanks for having me on for your first episode, and glad to be here with you and your audience.
Okay, so a little bit about your career and tell me if I get anything wrong. Uh, you started out in Newark as a field agent. We probably know some of the same people there. We'll talk offline. I don't want to out them with their names because two of the names that were there did undercover work, but I bet you know who they are. Um, you got there in late '95, and then you went to Counterterrorism Division at FBI headquarters. Then you went to my old stomping grounds at Washington Field Office as an SSA. And did you get elevated from SSA to ASAC without having to make the trip back up through the Golden Triangle?
Yeah, what I did at headquarters was, because of the 9/11, the post 9/11 atmosphere, I was able to go there, do the initial tour in counterterrorism division after 9/11, and then I picked up a unit chief position because we were building some new programs. There just wasn't enough people to bring in. And then I went out and did the SSA thing, the squad supervisor tour, which was great. The program I was working in, counterintelligence, technical operations, and then was able to pick up an ASAC job at WFO.
And then you had two stints at the Terrorist Screening Center, separated by being special agent charge in Buffalo. You were deputy director of Terrorist Screening Center, and then the director. And then from the Terrorist Screening Center, that's when you got elevated to executive assistant director, science and technology branch.
That's correct.
So, so there's there's something out there right now, and producer Chris, I think I sent you the tweet, and it's about these hidden files in the FBI system. Do we have that tweet available, or did I send that to you? If we have it, he's going to put it up on the screen. It's I'm trying to remember who it was. There we go. From Margot Cleveland. I don't know if you know her at all. I've heard the name before.
Mm-mm.
So I'll be blunt about it. There are the way that the electronic case file system, Sentinel, all of that stuff works is, depending on what type of case you're working. So if you're working public corruption and I'm in Jackson, Mississippi, and I do a keyword search for something connected to a public corruption file that I'm not part of, I'm likely to get a return on it, but it's going to be a bunch of X's. I won't be able to see anything. There's also going to be a notification that's going to be sent to whoever's managing that public corruption file that, hey, somebody down in Mississippi was looking into it. I had a couple of civil rights cases when I was a supervisor there that we were kind of concerned that some individuals in the office that had worked for one of the law enforcement agencies that we were investigating might take the time to look at the file just to see what's there. So we were constantly looking to see who accessed it. But apparently, according to Margot Cleveland, there's also another level of a file system that you search will never get any hits. You'll never know it's there. It's hidden from everybody. Uh, and I had not heard of this type of file. So you were in the science and technology branch. I mean, I worked at under either, I can't remember if it was part of that branch or not. I was at special technologies and applications section when I was at headquarters. I was unaware that there's even another level of a hidden system that only very few closed hole people might have access to. Do you recall anything like this existing?
What you're looking at here is some of the cases, particularly in the counterintelligence arena,
Yeah.
that they would keep away from everybody, and they would have them doing the reverse double weasel type of stuff to hide them in the system because they still had a populated case file. Earlier on, there were some files that you never even put something into the case file. You only did hard copy. It was that sensitive for the government. Now,
Yeah.
later on with Sentinel, now that was in the old ACS, right? The old automated case system, right? In
Yeah, I
Sentinel,
remember when I first got to Washington
yeah,
Field, you had that what was it, the Jamie Gorelick line with the separation between the national security side and the criminal
hmm
side. And I would ask the guys on it was called NS squads when I got there.
yeah,
I would ask them what where's your guys' stuff? I don't see it at all. And I would ask questions about what happens if somebody on your cases is is doing some criminal activity that's related, as part of their CI stuff that relates to my case. How would I know that? And it's basically through the analyst. And they talked about the Jamie Gorelick memo about putting that wall up. But I don't think it was as nefarious as Margot Cleveland is saying.
no,
People had access to it. It's not something where, with this disclosure of James Comey having some things in his, I guess, in the office or something that they found, Cash Patel and Bongino found once they got up there. It, I hate that they're portraying this as something nefarious. It's
well,
still the same axiom, and I talked about this with Gary. Uh, the only way to keep a secret is if you're the only one that knows the secret, and
right,
everybody you add to that chain makes it more likely that secret's going to be disclosed. So if it was something called prohibited files, I don't think they're giving the correct description of that.
right,
I mean, I wouldn't be able to search and see if there was an OP, Office of Professional Responsibility case running on me, but it would be in the system. And like you
right.
talked about in the old days, when we came in, the hard copies were there. There was still something electronic, and it was just in a different system. But I'd never heard of prohibited files.
No,
Is that the actual term?
terminology was restricted file, right? It was
Yeah.
restricted from access. And what would happen is like you said earlier, you would receive a notification that someone somewhere was trying to access a restricted file if you were the case agent. And then you would contact them or they would be contacted and say, hey, what do you need? And then you'd get together and say, hey, I have this criminal case. And then you'd do the collaborative thing and to see if you could give them temporary access or partial access to something that would help their case without compromising the reason for the restriction, right? So it wasn't as if these things didn't exist. If they were in the system, they were there, they had a presence. And also, these systems were set up to be fully auditable and discoverable, right? For all of our cases that we had to take to court. So they were fully auditable and discoverable. The only place you start seeing some of that hocus pocus that people tend to get a little uptight about is in the national security arena, where you just simply can't have people surfing through the case file system and running up on names of particular people, assets, places and situations that are of kind of international intrigue, so to speak. So those were restricted as well. And so again, some of them I don't know if you were ever worked in the area when we still use the term bigot list. There was a bigot list, and only 8 people were on it, and those are the only 8 people that could see a certain document or set of documents. So they don't call it that anymore, but they will restrict certain case file entries or content based upon the sensitivity of the case. Like you said, public corruption is another area that gets
Yeah,
restricted.
I think it's just a misunderstanding of it about the way that these things are kept restricted. Like if I searched for the terms OPR in my last name, I would probably get 0 hits on it, but somebody would be notified that I was searching for
That's
that.
correct.
So it's not necessarily that it's a system where uh, everything is obscured. There's still people that are on it, and there are people that know what's going on with the case. So it's not gone are the days of J. Edgar Hoover where he may have some secret JFK files, that he's holding on to that there's no record of. That changed a little bit as time went on with electronic case file, where we used to do indexing. So you might search for something in a case file and you get a hit. There's nothing, you wouldn't be able to see the document that's there,
Right.
but you would see that document was indexed to that. And then when it went, especially after 9/11, I know they had the Duke Street project where they were doing all that scanning stuff,
Right.
where they started from, present day, working their way back of anything that wasn't scanned and put into the system.
Mhm.
Then we went to everything's electronic. I know when I first started working a desk in the early 2000s, I'd come in, there would be a foot and a half high of paper in my inbox when I would come
Right.
in. When I retired, supervisors rarely had anything in their inbox except maybe not even a travel voucher. That even changed. Everything's electronic. I think that if I think this just may be a misunderstanding, and I hope that Miss Cleveland speaks with somebody that has a little more knowledge and insight on it, somebody like you, about explaining it in such a way that they understand it wasn't anything nefarious. It is a way to protect national security interest. It is a way to protect the rights of individuals. You don't want to go in if there's an OPR investigation or some investigation against you while you're still inside the bureau. You don't want to go in, have that person be able to search and find out, well, who's talking to them about me, so I can go and try to
Right.
counter that or something. So
Well,
I
hey,
think it's not quite as nefarious.
yeah.
um,
Well,
the
I'll
other
just say one
thing.
thing on that, Chris. Look,
Sure.
it protects the integrity and the sanctity of the investigative process, right?
Yeah.
Now, of course, people will look at it and say, well, it's a way to hide things and not be accountable and all the other nonsense you hear. But on some level, you have to protect the sanctity and the integrity of the investigative process, as you noted, so that people can't search for themselves or they can't search for other people who might be under investigation in certain areas and then tell these people and compromise investigative efforts, which it could happen if you don't properly protect that data, right? So the system's fully auditable. Again, if something like I heard something about they were destroying records, you can't destroy records in Sentinel. I tried to explain this on another show at one point. We don't have access to Sentinel on that level. That's the FBI's case management system.
Yeah.
We don't have access to withdraw a serial entry into a case file. We have to make a request, and then that serial will still be there and say that the file has been deleted, right? So even it's conspicuous by its absence, right? So I think
Yeah,
a
even
lot
if
of
you took
folks,
the reference out that this
right?
document was removed, it would go serial 1, 2, 4, 9, 10.
Exactly. It would be conspicuous by its absence. You're going to say, well, where are these other documents, right? So you're drawing attention by trying to delete things. It doesn't work that way. It was set up to be, again, fully auditable and discoverable. So I just want people to understand that you can take any good system and you can bastardize it and you can abuse it if you have unprincipled or corrupted leadership. You can try to do that. But that I think what this instance, I think you have some folks that have some maybe secondhand knowledge of some system operations, and maybe some folks are looking for some social media attention, and that probably sounds a little more better, a little more salacious than what it actually is.
Yeah, and it's in some of those individuals we've talked about. these little whistleblowers that I think collectively all three of them may have 14 years in the bureau, put together.
Right.
And I've talked to others about this. I think you and I have talked about it. There's no way in 6 or less years that how the bureau works.
No.
It is not possible. It takes a lot, and you tend to have your area that you look into, that you work in, that you have a lot of knowledge and experience in that area, but you still don't have the entire. No, I don't think there's any one person that has the entire scope and breadth of knowledge. And you talked about the Epstein files. I know a couple of these miscreants that claim to be whistleblowers that have said, "Oh, well, they're shredding documents and they're destroying evidence." All right. Well, I got asked about that on television, and I said, "Well, I got some questions." Well, number one, everybody that's involved in this understands that they're risking going to federal prison, right? Because
Correct.
they're committing a crime. Secondly, is everybody that's in that chain of knowledge, are they all sworn to secrecy, and not one of them will ever talk about it to anyone outside of that chain? That's not likely.
That's
And
unreasonably
third,
safe.
you know, is it even possible? Even if you got, and I asked guys, some of the best computer scientists in the world that I was working with at Stas in the early 2000s, was I said, could you do it? And they're like, well, are you going to give me root level access to the system that it's on right now? Like, okay, I'll give you that. Okay. Are you going to give me access to the backup copies that are somewhere else that aren't on the system? Yeah. Are you going to give me copies to the backup copies? Are you going to give me access to the information that's electronic that's over in the U.S. Attorney's office? So I get access to that. And can you guarantee that when I get access to that, that only you and I will know about it? Nobody else will, and there'll be no evidence of me going in there. It's just not possible.
It is so it is so unlikely, and nothing's impossible, right? But
Yeah.
it is so highly unlikely that you can get that level of you could say combined conspiratorial, corruptive, whatever behavior you want to call it, and then have people keep the secret. It's just not going to happen. So, and the systems were made and they have safeguards in them to discourage and to defeat that type of activity. Like you said, the backups and everything else. So, again, very unlikely and impossible. Nothing's impossible, but very, very, very highly unlikely.
Yeah, the just the level of even just trying to access it. Somebody's going to
Right.
put you in the office because you badged in. They're going to put you at the computer because you had to
Oh, yeah.
badge to get in the computer. They're going to show that what you accessed when and what all
Sure.
that's taken, and it is so well thought of. And I know you can't even get inside a hardwired computer network and tap into a line. There are measures against that, which I'm not going to talk about here. And the system itself, if you introduce something onto that system that's not supposed to be there, like a thumb drive, security division knows immediately.
Yeah, they get notified. The system will say that there was an unauthorized, and actually to go on even one step further, Chris, many of the computers that were used in day-to-day investigative work in the office, the external thumb drive port, the ports, the interface ports, they were
Yeah,
disabled. So even if you stuck a thumb drive in there, it wouldn't work. So even
yeah,
if you had an enabled port, somebody would get a notification immediately to say, "Hey, you were trying to download stuff." So that's where people, I
yeah.
think, got into a little bit of trouble on some of that too.
It is just sorry, returning a text message from somebody. When I watch, and I hate to keep harping on these guys because I don't want to give them any more notoriety than they do. They have taken it, I think they take advantage of the lack of knowledge and curiosity to actually ask people that know what they're talking about to validate what these whistleblowers are saying about this. And I don't really engage with them. I'll make some comments here or there, because again, I don't want to draw them into my circle, and I definitely don't want to deal with some of their followers that are all into the conspiracy theories and stuff and have
Right.
them start attacking me. I just don't have time to deal with that. I don't care whether they do it. I can just ignore it.
Nah.
But I can tell you who two things. First of all, the thing that Margot Cleveland said, I did share that with somebody from Patel's office, and they are, I think they will answer that at some point. It is something that was brought to their attention. They're looking into it. They want to make sure that they
Right.
thoroughly explain why what you and I just talked about, that's not of how that works. It's not a prohibited file that only like the director and one other person may have access to. Well, they would have to be the only ones working the case to have access to it. Um,
Yeah.
but I did see, and this was based on, have you watched some of the media hits that Patel and Bongino have made? They've been primarily sticking to Fox News,
Right.
which that
Yeah.
that I have brought to their circle of attention about,
Yeah.
hey, you need to kind of, if you're going to do this, kind of spread it out. We don't want people asking questions about whether or not they're seeking a paid contributorship at Fox News.
Yeah.
There are other entities that are out there. Not saying they have to go on CNN, but heck, go on Newsmax or something,
Yeah.
or talk to local media. I'm also more of a big fan of them actually being behind a podium and making statements. I just think, and taking questions from the media. I think that's just more professional and it lends some credibility. But I did see that Dan Bongino, without naming individuals, and I kind of know who he's talking about, said these individuals that are doing things to undermine the credibility of what we're trying to get done, undermine the credibility of the agents here, and undermine the reform that we have, uh, it's going to get addressed. That's not a threat. It's, listen, this is of retribution. It's not Dan Bongino being insulted by it. I mean, he could quit today and go back and get behind his microphone and just totally destroy these individuals on social media. But what they're doing now, what they're attempting to do in the way some of these large follower podcasts that are out there that are bringing these individuals on and highlighting them, what's ended up happening is that undermines the efforts that they've got right now to clean things up. They want to be able to complain that nothing's getting done, and then they want to do things to undermine the things that are getting done. And when you have individuals that have these mega follower podcasts that don't have the background knowledge or expertise, I was under the impression that when you're and I have friends in the media, that if you're a reporter, you double source, you triple source the information you got before you go with it. And it seems like these guys are just, they bring them right in, they say something idiotic and salacious and it's damaging, and it's not counted on it. What are your thoughts on Bongino and Patel? They're a little more open about addressing these efforts to undermine the things that they're trying to do.
Uh, we've discussed this before. I think their strategy on the media probably could use a little bit of adjustment at this point. I think they're inviting a lot more critique on certain issues that they really don't, they can't get caught up in that minutia, right? And you have these folks out in social media who are those kind of loud voices. Nothing's good enough, fast enough, big enough, small enough, whatever it is. They're kind of a contrarian element, and they're bitter, and they're hateful. They because of their negative interactions with the FBI. So I think unless the current leadership at the director and deputy director level do exactly what these people say, and they do exactly what these people recommend, then they're going to be on the bad side of those groups of people who, where it's, let me put it this way, it's become sport to kick the bureau in the face, no matter how good of a job they do, no matter how bad of a job they do. It's just, they just get kicked in the face for everything. It's become sport out in social media, and I wish the deputy director and director would just stop and pause for a second and look at the changing in sentiment in certain areas and look at their messaging focus so that they can get that confidence and respect back for the organization. I was looking at some commentary on, recent, like you said, Fox News visits by the, Bongino and Patel, and the sentiment was largely negative. I mean, from what I was seeing. So some of that, I think they have to stop and just look at the strategy, look at what they're putting out and look at the feedback. If they're going to govern by social media sentiment, then they got to look and see what their messaging's coming across as. And I see it's probably about 50-50 now, you know, for and against, when they come out and they say, hey, we got a big announcement to make a big announcement to make a, you know, that type of thing. And then the folks aren't liking it too much. So, as far as those couple of individuals that you know, had kind of banded together as whistleblowers, I mean, I think the organization should look at their cases, adjudicate them really expediently, and let these people move on with their lives.
Yeah, I think and I put the challenge out, and this can be done. I put the challenge out to these three young whistleblowers.
Mhm.
Sign the release. Allow your security division file and your personnel file to be made public. There's nothing classified in it. There wasn't anything classified from what they were whistleblowing about. Make it public, and let's see what the public thinks about it. Let them take a look at it. You can do that. You can authorize your own release. Here's all of my information, and let everybody, if they want to keep arguing their case in the court of public opinion, well, then give the public all of the information, and they're not going to take me up on that.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was this secret stash of Jim Comey that these guys, that Bongino and Patel came across. I'm guessing at your level, I know it, heck, at my level, and I only made it up to GS14. I've been in the director's office. It's not huge. It's not this big palatial suite. As a matter of fact, I think the special agent in charge office in the FBI Jackson division, from my recollection, is bigger than the FBI director's office. Now he's got that conference room table right outside it, and of course he has his own bathroom. But I remember when we took the tour when Louis Free was director, and your class may have done the same thing. You'd make the trip up to headquarters on the bus, and you go in and you walk around, and then we sat around that big table and we had a meeting with director. We were there with Free for like an hour and a half. I remember one of the field counselors that was with us falling asleep at the table because it was kind of warm in that room as we're listening to him talk. And I was amazed at the level of access, even though I hadn't graduated the academy yet. We were getting ready to graduate. We got to walk around inside Free's office, and on his desk were the final reports for the Waco shooting and for the other one with Ruby Ridge. These things were just sitting on his desk in the open, and it wasn't covered up with anything. I didn't touch it, but I felt like I could have flipped through the pages. I mean, I just think that he was he's like, you guys are FBI agents. Why wouldn't you be able to look at this? It's not classified. But yeah, from your recollection, that office, and you've probably been up there since several times since Louis Free with the other directors. Has it changed any? Is it still kind of small? There's a bathroom in the back, and
Same,
I think he
same
actually had a
office.
shower or something in there.
Yeah, he had the executive washroom, right? You know
But it
that
was
he for,
it was a typical FBI Hoover Building executive
a-
washroom.
absolutely. It was the cream of the crop at the Hoover Building, which isn't saying a whole lot, right? But I'll
I
tell you,
still
my
remember the urinals there with the foot pedals on them.
oh
So you
yeah,
didn't
it was
flush it
yeah.
with your hand. You
There
reached
you
up with
go.
your foot and hit the foot pedal to
Yeah.
flush the
Well, I'll tell you
flush
this
it.
much. You mentioned the SAC's office in Jackson. My office, when I was the SAC in Buffalo, my office was huge compared to Louis Freeze or any other directors, you know. So I will tell you this, after 9/11, access to that area became much more restricted, where they put up the uh, coded doors and everything after 9/11
Yeah.
for increased security. But before then, you could wander down that hall. Nobody really wanted to, but you could, and you could access that area freely. After 9/11, it became much more restricted, and
Mhm.
access was done then by door code, so they knew who was in and out, right? So they could track who was
Yeah, to
moving
talk
and
about
walking
how
around.
easy the difference in the level of access pre 9/11 and post. The first was just access to FBI headquarters.
Right.
I was a tour shooter. I got on the team early in my career when I was at WFO, so I went up half a day once a month. I forget what the guy's name was that did the schedule. You just tell him when you're available. He'd put you on the schedule and you go up there. And I enjoyed it because the FBI tours would come through and
Right.
you did the weapons demonstration from behind the glass, that shot where Patel and Bongino were sitting,
Right.
that
Yeah.
indoor range. It looks a little different there. But, you know, what I really loved about it was getting the chance to interact with the citizens because I would come from behind the glass after doing the firearms demonstration with an MP5, a 38, and then my issued Glock, and then come out from behind to talk, and they would ask questions, and you
Right.
kind of knew even as a young agent what areas you shouldn't speak about,
Right.
things you'd have to refer, but most of the questions were pretty basic, asking about difference between television and the FBI, and the kids asking questions too was amazing. And the kids would ask things, hey, any chance I could have that target that you just shot at? And I always enjoyed that because I'd go get the target and can you autograph it for me? And
Right.
speaking of that, if you look over my left shoulder here, you'll see a little bullet hole type target up there.
Yeah,
That
I
is
see
one
it.
of the targets from the indoor shooting range back around 2000. And and I just had the idea when I finished it up. I was like, okay, it's pretty decent grouping for what I did with
Yeah.
shoot
I,
fully
I wish
automatic
my targets.
MP5.
I wish my targets looked like that.
So anyway, I just took it up to the seventh floor, and I walked into the entry area toward the director's office, and I think Free was probably in his office, and I just dropped it off of whoever the secretary was at the time, and I said, "Hey, do you think Director Free would autograph this for my kids?" And she said, "I'm confident he would." So I left a business card and I put the name of my children. So on that target up there, it says to Jake and Josh Hinkle, best wishes, Louis Free. And it's ink pen. So it's not that little machine that when
Yeah.
you walked in was to the right that did the signatures
The
on
auto pen.
diplomas and stuff like that. He actually took a ballpoint pen out and signed that target. And I keep that there in my office. Down below that's a picture of my graduating class
Yeah.
from the
It's
academy.
funny when you say that, Chris. Is you can see what a different time that was for the FBI, right? You can
Yeah.
see the different culture that was in place and the way of doing things and just how things were up until 9/11, and then how things changed afterward. And I had the
Yeah,
pleasure of
I know
sitting
they
with like
tried to
some of
bring
the
the tour back. So 9/11 happens, and
right.
probably for about 8 months or so, we didn't have an FBI tour. And then they tried to start it back up. But they had some extra security measures before they would allow people to come in to take the tour. And then it just finally just went away. I kind of wish they would bring that back. They've still got the
They
indoor
have.
facility and you got the walking tour. I think that
Yeah.
it would be something that's kind of a reward, a real-time reward for agents in the field to get to interact with the public, to do the firearms demonstration and then come back from behind the glass and let them ask the questions. I think the public would go nuts over that rather than just walking through. I've been through the new tour, and
Yeah,
it's
it's a lesser, I'll say it's a lesser version of what you used to be able to do, and you don't have as much interaction on a personal level, right? So
yeah.
that's what they brought back. I think they did an okay job in trying to resurrect it, but I don't think it was a priority.
Yeah, I think if they would get back to allowing it, it's similar to the White House tour. So pre 9/11, uh, as an agent, if I wanted to bring my family up and take a White House tour, I didn't have to get on the list. I just contacted some of the agents that worked
Right.
applicants and stuff over in the Eisenhower area, and I would say, "Hey, can you walk me in with the tour?" And they'd say,
Right.
"Okay, well, don't bring your gun, bring your badge and stuff, and you bring your family, and then you just meet them up there. I think there's a Libertyville area where you'd meet, and they would take you in, and you could walk through the tour." Uh, Unfortunately, I didn't get to do that. We showed up that day. This is when Bush was in office, and my dad and mom were in town, and was taking my wife and our two kids at the time to go through and take the tour. And they had a bomb threat, and that cut it off for the day. And we just didn't have time to go back.
That's too
Uh,
bad.
I don't even know if you can get that kind of what I think you have to go through a congressman or a senator to even get on that list to get that tour.
It's tightened it. They tightened that up a lot, and I think again it shows the change in culture where the accessibility to the public was very much diminished, right? I did one of those tours where I had a buddy of mine was a Secret Service guy. He just said, "Yeah, meet me at the gate at noon," that type of thing, and he took us in, and they used to be able to do that, and that's just kind of gone away too.
Yeah, I think you may still be able to do a Capitol, after dark tour. If you know somebody over at the Capitol, you can show up and they may walk you through the Capitol. But yeah, I think if, I've got to write another article. I wrote one with day one recommendations for the FBI director. This is before Patel was even mentioned, but we knew that I don't even think Ray had announced he was leaving yet, but I knew that come January 20th, Chris Wray was not going to be the FBI director
He
anymore.
was leaving one way or another, right?
Yeah.
So
Can you talk, before we cut off here, can you talk a little bit about your experience and what it's like at that executive assistant director level? Now, you and I have talked before about the fact that as an EAD, and I think at least the deputy director, I mean, the directors of the various divisions and stuff, you get indoor parking and you get a car. And that in itself in the DC area of trying to get back and forth to work, of being able to do that. But what was typically your day like as an EAD? Was it just a lot of meetings with other EADs and people under you? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Well, you rolled in the morning. You got there pretty early to make sure I was able to rip through all the overnight email and overnight communications, look at all of the reports that came around from all of the various operation centers, and look for highlights, that would be pertinent. We'd have a first meeting in the morning with the deputy director, and then we'd have a subsequent meeting with the director, and there might have been a few follow-on meetings with the deputy on special issues that were going on, and he wanted status updates or whatever ever after the directors meeting. But most of the day was spent coordinating issues on a national or international level. I used to tell people that when things got to my desk, they were national impact issues. Maybe not national public attention issues, but they were national impact issues that we would sit and make decisions on. And some of them I would have to, of course, collaborate with the other EADs and say, how are we going to marshal people, resources, and organizational energy to get a sustainable, reasonable, either a response or a preventative posture for these issues. Also, working with external agencies, we would have to look at how we were going to overlap authorities and resources. So it was a lot of coordinating work. And also, I had the largest branch in the Bureau, right? I had the largest budget and the largest branch in the FBI. So we were an enterprise service provider, not only for the FBI, but for the intelligence community and the law enforcement community. So we had a lot of stakeholders that we would work with there, and then helping run the priorities of the FBI, making sure that we had alignment with the director's stuff, and responding to queries from the Hill, from NSC, everybody else. So it was a kind of like being a CEO almost of a small, medium, or large, small business, and we would coordinate those matters. And we were the direct. My chain of command was right to the deputy director. Some of the other EADs reported to the associate deputy director. Depending on the business line. And yeah, we just made sure that the operations and investigations were running properly, that the field offices had what they needed within what resources we had, and then we helped prioritize, daily, weekly, monthly types of issues. And plus, we were also, remember, we were still staff members for the director and the deputy. So we used to get a lot of hair on fire. I need this, I need that. Where is this? I need an update. I just got called to the Hill. What's going on with this? And one last thing we used to have to react to was the news tickers on your flavor of news, whether it was CNN, Fox, take your pick. And we would get calls from the department. What's going on with this? And we'd say, what are you talking about? Because I didn't have my TV. I never kept my TV on in the office. I said, what are you guys talking about? They said, oh, yeah, I came across the news ticker that this happened. So then we would have to, all right, drop everything we're doing, find out what's going on, give a report, find out if it, and then we also handled critical incidents, mass shootings, things of that sort. We would get together, again, marshaling resources, people, and a response. So whenever that happened, we dropped everything and went to one of those critical incident type of management structures to go out and deal with, any of the again attacks, mass shootings, what have you. So,
So,
my day lasted usually from about 6:30 to about 6:30 on a. That was a good day without incident, right? So some other days were a little longer.
so you and I were part of that generation pre EAD and Directorate of Intelligence and
Right.
pre cyber division, all of these things, and we were there post. Um, I always felt like that the impetus behind creating these new levels between put more of a level between the field and the director. I was really amazed at when I was a field desk supervisor that the chain between me and the director was actually shorter, smaller steps in chain than if I was at FBI headquarters and had to work through the steps in the chain as a headquarters SSA to the unit chief to the assistant section chief to the section chief to the DAD to the AD to the EAD. I mean, to me it just seemed like it flowed a little better, and I see this concept that Cash and Dan, and it feels weird to call them that. I'm still old school director and deputy
Yeah.
director, and we're in contact with somebody from their circle, and that person even said, "Why do you keep calling? You're not in the FBI anymore. Why do you keep referring them to this?
No,
Why not just call them
they're the
Cash and Dan?"
director.
I'm
They're the
just old
director
school.
and deputy. That's just how it
Yeah.
goes.
So,
Yeah.
do you think that they could go back to that they could just get rid of the EAD level and go back to and combine some of these divisions that were created? I mean, I think they got rid of that diversity division, which was stupid anyway.
Yeah.
But some of these divisions could, records management division and something else that's administrative probably could be combined under one as assistant director.
Mhm.
And I even put in my article that I wrote, I think you could blanketly walk in and say, I'm going to eliminate 50% of the SES positions at headquarters because I know I know of unit chiefs, I know of section chiefs that didn't have to directly supervise as many people as I had to as a field desk supervisor.
Right.
You might have, I knew section chiefs that had three, an assistant section chief and maybe three unit chiefs that reported to him. That's it.
Well,
And here I was field desk supervisor where I had like 15 people under me and an RA and 7 programs and all of that. I felt like I was drinking through a fire hose. Would you be pro or against trying to get back to the structure similar? Well, I mean, they're doing something now with this regional concept where I don't even think they're called EADs anymore, but they're going to
no.
be over certain portions of the United States. Um, what are your thoughts on that as somebody who has been at that
Sure.
level?
Sure. No, I agree with you completely that a lot of the, I would say cottage industries, as I used to call them, popped up after 9/11 and then after, through the Jim Comey years. And Christopher Wray didn't change anything really. So a lot of that stuff came from the Mueller and Comey years. And I think you can streamline, combine, collapse some of those programs together. You can shave a lot of I would say resources off, move them more toward operations and investigations, direct operations, not all the peripheral stuff, right? Now, here's the problem with what's going on. When they brought the EAD concept online, Director Mueller was having a hard time with the span of control at the time of at post 9/11, right? Because it was chaos. So that's why he created those EAD positions. So he said, "Look, I need some people I can go to directly. These will be my XOs, right? These are my folks that I can go to directly to manage and run programs." Because the deputy was also just getting punished after 9/11. So they couldn't take that time day to day to shepherd certain things, business and operations at a bureau. They created those EAD jobs. I remember a few folks who they were going to, and here's the interesting thing. I knew some of the SACs at the time that were out in some of the other field offices. They were supposed to do this regional thing way back in the day,
Hmm.
right? They were supposed to do this back in like the 2010, 2011 timeframe. And Mueller took those positions that they were going to do these regional managers, like, cut up the country type of thing. And he pulled those in, and he kind of recommissioned them as the EAD slots for himself at the field, at the headquarters level. So there are a lot of guys and ladies out in the field, the bigger offices. It was San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, New York. All these places were supposed to have these like EAD equivalent positions to manage field operations. He pulled them in and centralized that power structure, and then it kind of went like that for a bunch of years until the director Patel came in and reorganized. The only thing I would say about the current way they're trying to push things back to the field, which I believe is a good move, right? You need good, capable field commanders, and then you got to let them do good, capable field operations, right? Pretty
Yep.
pretty easy to say. And I think after 9/11, what you saw was a consolidation of power at FBI headquarters because they lost faith in all the field offices. And the country lost faith in the Bureau after the tragedy of 9/11. So any organization that is threatened or troubled or in distress, what's the first thing they do? Centralize power, right?
Yep.
You watch it in the private sector, you watch it everywhere, right? They centralize power. That's what happened at the Hoover building. I watched it happen, and I knew a lot of the folks who kind of jet rocketed up into some of those positions. And it was about being able to get that command and control back at the seventh floor when Director Mueller was there. So
Yeah,
that
I think
started it.
I mentioned this. I was on. I can't. I think I was on Newsmax, and we were talking about this centralized concept,
Mm-hmm.
and I said I think you're going to see more enthusiasm from the field because SACs and their people are going to be able to say these are the threats in our domain. You're not going to have some analyst up at headquarters trying to tell somebody like me in Mississippi, you got to look under every rock for a Russian. And I'm like, agents have been here since the 60s. I've got 10 cases right now with real threats. Well, no, until you ask all of these questions. And you know what ends up happening when you go out and you start asking your tripwires, your liaison, and your sources. If you focus on, tell me what you're seeing. Are you seeing any Russians? Are you seeing any Russians? Are you seeing any Russians?
They're going
Then
to
you
start seeing
get them
Russians.
going, wow, we must have a Russian problem here if the FBI is
Exactly.
asking questions about it.
Yeah,
And then they start
exactly.
seeing Russians that don't exist, and it just causes problems.
Hey, let me ask.
Quick,
Let me add one more thing. Right,
sure.
the decentralization of operational authority to the SACs. They tried to do it, but then they kind of clawed it back. Right, they tried to do it for a little while, and they just didn't weren't happy with some of the results out in the field. And to me, that's because you had maybe some field commanders that weren't suitable. It wasn't the fact that you can't do it; it's that they weren't comfortable with it. I'll give you one real quick anecdotal. When I was in Buffalo, we were doing some pre-inspection type of stuff, and we were getting my violent crime supervisor comes in my office. He says, "Hey, you got a minute?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "Hey, we're getting some heat from headquarters because we don't have enough southern border cases." I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Yeah, we don't have enough southern border
Buffalo?
cases." I said, "Do they realize where Buffalo, New York is?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, but I said, "Look, I'll call down there if if you can't work it out with the unit, the
Yeah.
folks at the unit level. I'll call down there and I'll take care of it." Because I knew all the folks, at CID. He was able to work it out. But I was like, are you kidding me? I have to have southern border cases because that's a national priority, and I'm in Buffalo, New York. So it just shows you how sometimes the tail wags the dog, and you do have those folks at headquarters who all they're worried about is the process, not the outcome. And that's one
Yeah.
thing that we used to hurt the field. And I'm glad that they're looking at that now. I just hope that they don't create some own like self-inflicted operational conflicts. And here's why I say that, Chris, because the way they have it set up now, I guess the deputy director Bongino has control of the ADIC level offices, New York, LA, and WFO,
WFO.
right? And then you have the rest of the country's kind of cut up in this, whatever fashion. Well, what happens if I'm in charge of national security stuff, but I have these 10, 15 offices? but now I'm trying to dictate national security operations for the Bureau. But now I have to go to another EAD to say, hey, I want your office to do this. And he's saying, no, that conflicts with my prioritization in this region. So you're going to get some of those growing pains. So I hope they keep that in mind as they're moving some of those programs back out to the field.
Yeah, I think there will be growing pains, and I think I get the feeling, or I hope that um, Patel and Bongino are a little more flexible than Mueller was when he was in.
Mueller had no flexibility, man. So
No,
they
there
they
was
have
none.
to be. Hey,
I
by
could
default, they have to be more flexible.
I could tell you he did some things that caused some long-term problems. The
Oh
first
yeah.
was uh, the first was when they set that headquarters staffing initiative in to
Uh,
bring people to headquarters, and they were paying them
Disaster.
an exorbitant amount of money and their regular pay and giving them bumps and promotion
Right.
opportunities until they figured out that you can't put somebody up here for 18 months to 2 years and pay them tons of TDY pay. According to GSA regulations and stuff, there has to be a point where it's reduced. If you're up here that long, you're not
Yeah.
TDY anymore. The other thing that he did that caused significant problems was this 3-year rotational policy for new
Right.
agents. And a quick anecdote with him, I'd been down in Jackson for about a year. And one of the reasons they brought me down there was because of my background and experience in cyber. And they said, we need you to come down here. Our cyber program is a mess. Just get it going. And it was such a mess that, on the cyber crime side, I had an FSL of 2 for the entire state.
Right.
And on the cyber counterintelligence side or national security side, I had an FSL of 2 throughout the state. So I had 4, but I only had 2 of those bodies under my direct supervision on my squad. I had a half body for an SSRA in the north and a half body down south. They had their own priorities, and I
Yeah.
had no authority over them. So that caused a problem. The 3-year rotational policy caused problems because you and I both know most of the older agents at that time, they were still Hoover agents when we came in. They weren't adept at computers or they didn't want to work any of that stuff. They were just reluctant to do it. So
That's
you
a nice
usually had
way.
the
That's a
younger
nice way to
agents.
put it.
Yeah, the younger
That's a
agents
nice
that
way.
were the younger agent. Well, I mean, an older agent, if you're, especially if you were KMA, you could
Right.
retire the next day. You had the ability to say, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Chris, let
But
me ask you a
the
question, just from
Sure.
context. Were you there when they were still doing airtels? And were you there when we
No,
used to
no,
have the
no, no,
greens?
no.
Oh, I was there with the guys with the greens and the blues and the airtels and all that stuff. Yeah, and then we had a room with this couple of computers in it, and they would go and say, "Yeah, here's a couple of these computers, but we don't even turn them on."
Yeah, no,
That
even
was
when I was on the cyber crime squad, when
right.
I got to WFO, and there was only one there at the time, and I know that changed by the time you got to WFO. Um,
Yeah,
I had a laptop computer that was issued to me at Quantico that was connected to the internet that I wrote communications on.
yeah,
But if I wanted something put into the automated case system, into ACS, I saved it to a floppy disk. I gave it to the secretary, and the secretary is the one that
they
put
would
it
do
up
the
there.
upload.
And then the written paperwork, the rotor took care of that.
Yeah,
But getting back to my interaction with Mueller, so he came down. It was in 2007, and we're sitting in the room, and there's all of us supervisors, there's some support supervisors, uh, and our AO, our administrative officer, which I don't know. He tried to say he was executive management, but I'm like, dude, I'm a 14, you're a 13. You're not telling me what to do here. So
right.
that's another story. So Mueller's there, and the analyst gets up to talk about our cybercrime program. Now, granted, I'd been there maybe 10 months. So trying to turn an entire program around from, an 85% underburn, and I know you're familiar with that
Right.
term under TURC, time utilization record keeping. Um, she gets up and speaks, and we're at 65% underburn. And he's like, well, this is one of our higher priority programs. We just created a whole division to handle cybercrime. We didn't even have a cyber division when you and I came in. Why is this the case? And she was trying to explain it. And I said, well, I can answer. I said, the problem we have is it's a small office. I have 15 people under me on the squad. So I have to move resources, and I pull somebody away from violent crime that doesn't know a lot about cyber. the ones that want to do it are the younger agents that are excited about it and getting to go to the classes and get certified. Uh, Once I get these new agents up to speed and they're generating productivity, boom, they're gone. They're pulled out of Jackson Division and sent to Chicago, or they're sent to WFO or New York.
Mm.
And I said, then I have a backfill need that for another 6 months, I don't have anybody here unless I pull an old guy over to do it. And back then, an old guy was 10 years in to do it. And he said, so what you're saying is that your problems down here in Jackson are a result of my 3-year rotational policy. Is that what you're saying? And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
And my SAC was about ready to crawl into the table when I said that. And Mueller kind of looked at me for a bit and then he laughed, like, not going to change. You basically didn't affect anything. I don't really care what you think. He's just an arrogant, just it's my way or the highway. The three or four meetings I've had with him in my career, none of those were pleasant.
Well, he was always in send mode, right? He was never in receive mode. Always
No,
send
no.
with the former
And
director.
and
But I'll tell you,
God help you if you had to do the director's daily briefing, because you were getting there at about 3 o'clock in the morning to put that thing together. And then
I used
somebody
to,
like you as an EAD, if you were at that level when Mueller was, with Mueller there, you
yeah.
probably had to be either get your stuff in the night before or early that morning.
Well, I'll tell you what, under the director Mueller, I remember I was acting assistant section chief for a little while. Well, we transitioned. I used to have to get to the office by about 5:30 to 6 just to read stuff to make sure that I can start the morning meeting cycle that used to rev up before the meetings with Mueller. It was brutal, right? And we said we used to joke about it. We've reached administrative nirvana, right? We talk about things, we count things, we put all these reports together, and then we talk about the reports that we put together, and then I said, when are we actually getting investigations going? People used to walk in. I remember I was one of the first people. We were the first people in the new ITOS structure, right? The new counterterrorism division structure. And people used to walk in and say, "Hey, do we have surveillance on these people?" And we would say, "No, there's not 24-hour surveillance." And they say, "Well, put it on there because we just briefed that it was." And that's what was going on. That kind of stuff in the field. We would have to call the field and say, "Hey, guys, can you do this?" And they would be screaming, what do you mean? This doesn't warrant 24-hour surveillance. But hey, we just
Yeah, I
told
got a
Mueller to do
statewide
that.
FSL of 70 agents, and you want me to pull
Right.
15 of them off and
To
from
do
around the
24
state.
hour. Yeah. But
Yeah,
you
it's
know, you tell them, hey man, they just briefed the director that you had this going on. So, try to put something together, right? And they always understood. The field guys always like, God, they would curse us out at headquarters, but they'd say, all right, we get it. So, but yeah, but Mueller and those guys, that centralized power created that type of thing. And Mueller, like I said, always in send mode. Chris, I'm telling you, I went to more meetings with the senior management, section chief and up, SES grades when I was a hump at headquarters. Just the fierce sweat. They were pale. We have to go into meetings with this guy. It was amazing the atmosphere that was there of just fear, shame, and guilt every day about everything. It was crazy.
so there's two levels in the bureau, I think, that would work out well if you had another Mueller. If everybody in that room was KMA, they would probably be a little more candid with him about, you're not going to talk to me this way. Oh yeah,
Maybe.
heck, I'll leave now. I'll retire at the end of the day. Uh, the second is in dealing with things. So we've got James Comer, with this committee. He's going to have these hearings and subpoena about the auto pen and all of that. And you've probably had some interaction with our what is it, the the Congressional Liaison Office or something that deals with
Office of
Congress.
Congressional Affairs is what their
Office of
formal
Congressional
title
Affairs,
was.
that's it.
Yeah.
Um, so the those guys can tell you that the investigative level of at Congress, when they put their investigators on, is nowhere near the level of a good GS-13 street agent.
Yeah.
And I would think that they would be well suited to try to find some of these retired agents that probably didn't spend a lot of time in management, like myself, or that can come in and actually conduct an investigation if they really want to get the bottom of it. The other is, I know I heard Comey was brought over to Washington Field to be interviewed about his seashell collection,
Ah, yeah.
and I hope, I pray that if he was going to be interviewed by agents, that it wasn't going to be an SSA, an ASAC, or one of the. I guess now you can't. Now at WFO, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting an SAC. There's that many of them.
Yeah.
I hope that they bring in a really good, reputable, solid agent to do the questioning on there. I said this when Hillary Clinton was brought in for her questioning about the servers and stuff, and she got to bring a whole team of lawyers in, and there were executive managers that were in that meeting in the FBI. There wasn't a street level agent, and my recommendation was, hey, I've been pretty successful at interviews and interrogations. I got a good track record at working cases. My track record's good enough that rarely any of my cases make it to court because they tap out before we get there. When we get to the negotiation phase, they're like, all right, well, I admitted to everything. I can't get out of
Right.
this. I used to kind of roll my eyes at people like, I've testified in court in the last 17 of 20 of my cases. I'm like, well, you probably didn't do a good job on your case if it made
Yeah.
it to court.
If it
Uh,
got that
but I
far, they
said,
thought they had a fighting chance. Right.
yeah. So,
Usually, yeah.
so mine was, if you're going to have Hillary Clinton up here, just put
Mhm.
me and maybe a note taker in the room with me, and just let me talk to her. That's it. You
Well,
know,
that comes down to Chris. They didn't have the faith in our agents anymore after 9/11. That's why a lot of that
no,
stuff
I think so. I think
happened.
some of it was ego too. They want to be the
Maybe,
person. I
maybe.
think, and I never met Strzok personally. I don't know whether you did. I think
I
Strzok.
knew Pete Straw.
So
Yeah.
Strzok was probably a lot of, I'm better at this than somebody else. I'll work the case again.
I'll tell you what happened there. He was a very accomplished Russian foreign counterintelligence agent and then
Yeah.
program supervisor. Very accomplished, seen as very, very capable. Went up the career chain, makes it to that deputy assistant director level in the counterintelligence division. He was also very close to Andy McCabe, who was the deputy director, or the EAD, and then deputy director at some point, right, for national security, and then for the whole bureau. So when they found this so-called Russian collusion nonsense and everything else that was coming around, they tapped Strzok to come in and head the investigation, not run it, but head the investigation. Pete ended up running the investigation, which is where everything
So
ran off the
so
rails.
remind me again. By the time Strzok was running this investigation, how many years had passed before he actually worked a case?
Oh, you know what?
10,
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to
10 or
think. Let's
more?
see. Maybe.
Yeah.
He had been in more of that program management level for at least I'd say 5 to 7 minimum,
The
probably
difference, it's a
closer to
different
10.
skill set managing a program and keeping up with metrics and things like
Oh,
that than it is
absolutely,
actually being a case agent. And what I used to
absolutely.
tell, I used to caution those that were stepping out of management if they've been in management for a long time. Somebody that made that jump at 4 or 5 years to headquarters and became a 14 and then spent the next 10 years. Uh, my argument was that by the time Strzok at 16, 17 years, having been in the Bureau, that he was trying to work a case again. If you took him from that level and you put him on a squad and said, go back and work cases, there'd be a curve there on him
Yeah,
actually getting his being able to do what you can do. And
without a
even
doubt.
though you're supposed to be rating, the agents, that if you're a squad supervisor, you're rating them according to a performance standard, you still kind of look at the agents at that level on your squad. So technically, if Strzok had stepped down and went back to being a GS-13 street agent, he's going to get measured against a GS-13, like I don't know if Brad Garrett was still in at WFO when you were there, But Brad Garrett never went above GS
Remember.
13.
Yeah.
Pretty solid street agent, reputable street agent.
Oh yeah.
Uh, your skill level against Brad that has been doing that for 17 years, as opposed to you did it for 5 or 6, went away for 10 years, and then came back. You're going to have a tough time competing with a guy like Brad Garrett.
Well, it's actually not even a tough time. I think it's impossible. And I'll tell you this, when I ran programs and managed, programs, every agent, and I wrote this in my book too, I was in charge of people nominally who were better than I was at everything, right? They were better than me. They knew how to do stuff. They were better agents. They were smarter. They knew how to do stuff. My job was to, one, back them up, give them the protection they needed from the idiocy that went on around the organization. My job was to direct traffic, get them resources, whatever it was. Keep the rest of the paper warriors off their backs. That was my job as a squad supervisor or an ASAC, right, in the field. And that's how I saw my role. I wasn't there because I was better than these guys. My first squad supervisor job, every agent there was 15 years plus, right? All of them. So I walk in
Yeah.
the door, kind of at about the maybe 10, 11 year point. I went in there and I sat down and said, okay, guys, what are we doing here? Tell me how we do this and what's going on. What are the issues? And, I kind of went in to learn from these guys and ladies, and they were better at everything than me. They knew everything. So I think if you can look at it that way, yeah, they should have had a couple of real hitter agents doing some of those discussions and then reporting back and say, okay, this is what I learned. You guys decide how you want to move forward on whatever the
Yeah, I
organization.
thought I hoped that when Comey was brought in, that they just basically took him to a conference room and you had 2 agents sitting in there. And you know,
Yeah.
you want the agents that know how to do that and they talk to. I don't know if that happened. It may have. I know the current
Uh-huh.
ADIC. I know the current ADIC at WFO. I got attacked in the media. I got attacked on social media for defending him. That's Steven Jensen. Uh, Steven's a pretty common sense kind of guy. I think if anybody could have made that happen, and at the ADIC level in an office like that, if the ADIC says a GS-13 is going to conduct this interview, a
Yeah.
GS-13 is going to conduct that interview.
Well, unless headquarters steps in and decides to help, right? And I
I, I
just
can
hope
tell
not,
I can tell you with based on just my conversations with people that are still at headquarters and in and around Bongino and Patel, uh, Stephen would make that call and they would stick behind him on it.
Well,
I'm
then
confident
God
that
bless
happened.
them. Then God bless them if they would do that.
And you know
That's
what?
not the way things
And
were done.
Stephen's the kind of guy that if you had a Comey or a Ray there that tried to push, no, I want this deputy assistant
Hey,
director like a Struck to do it. He's the kind of guy that would push back on it and say, why are we putting somebody in here that hasn't done this in a long time? I've got a
hey,
guy here that's routinely successful at doing it. Let's put him in there.
you just brought up a great point, and I want to mention one thing before we end today.
Yeah.
A lot of people blame the directors for past malfeasance at the Comey, Ray, maybe some of
Well, they were guilty of a
Bongino
lot of
level,
stuff.
right? I'll tell you where I see a lot of shortfall was at the deputy level, right? Who was the operations chief? It was the deputy. Who made those calls to the field offices and where did every SAC and ADIC report into? The deputy, right? So I think
Who was
there's,
Comey's? Remind me again, who was Comey's deputy?
well, Andy McCabe and then Dave Bowditch.
Yeah.
And then of course Paul Abate took over, and Paul was there over the last several
And
years
and,
of.
and Bowditch, I met him a couple of times. Bowditch is the one that actually fired McCabe.
I guess you can say that, but
He's the one that told him.
he, yeah. Well, okay, we can talk about that another time. But the point is, uh, the deputy directors require a bit of scrutiny and maybe some accountability as well as the director, because the deputy is just as powerful as the director, except for they're not the political appointee. But every decision that is of any worth or any impact or magnitude goes to the deputy director's office for
And I
adjudication.
think you've seen a change in demeanor from the Dan Bongino that was on his podcast
Oh
castigating
yeah,
the FBI. You can even look at him in the eyes when he's like, everything I get briefed every day is a 10 out of 10 level. Anything nine and
that is
below is
correct.
being handled below me.
That is
Uh,
correct. And that's why you had the EADs and other people who would handle that 9 and below. But when you got to that 5 alarm fire, you're sitting down the hall with the deputy and saying, hey, this is what's going on. Here's what we're doing to resolve it. Absent any direction, this is what we're going, And then he would go down and tell the director what's going on, right? So,
mm.
but I do think though we have to look at the deputies over time, and they bear some accountability for some of those decisions that were made when the FBI did certain things over the past 4 years plus.
Yeah, I could see McCabe being more involved in that than actually Comey.
Yeah,
I told somebody this, and I hated to use the term, but even when I bumped into Comey a couple of times in the cafeteria, which was odd to see the director standing in line to get a sandwich with me, was he was kind of buffoonish. He wasn't somebody that when he walked in, I'm like, oh, there's the director. Mueller, because he was so hateful and mean, would you would
stern.
kind of tighten up.
Yeah,
Ray was, I just think Ray was an empty suit, but
yeah, he was a caretaker. Director Ray was a
yeah,
caretaker.
Comey, I just think he was more than willing to play along with a lot of that stuff. I don't know if he instigated that stuff. I don't think he was the one that when Flynn got interviewed over at the White House, well, I'm just going to send a couple of agents over there. I think that was probably made levels below him, and he
Look, I'll
just went
tell you
along.
what, that was cooked up at the deputy and the director level. Nobody
Yeah.
below that level, and maybe an EAD for national security, right?
So real quick, last two things.
Sure,
I want
sure.
to talk to you about this, and then I want you to give me a little send off about your book. Um, when I get asked how would I grade Patel and Bongino with their time in office, I tell them it's too early for a grade. Do you know how many days that Kash Patel has been in office since he was sworn in? You know what the number is for today?
No, what's today?
99.
Okay.
He's been in there 3.5 months. So 99 days and you've got all these people out there like Emerald Robinson, Alex Jones, Jesse Kelly, they're all
Mhm.
screaming about why aren't people in handcuffs in 99 days? And we just talked about the level of things that get briefed in real world current threats that are going on to deal with that while simultaneously trying to assess who you can and can't trust in management. I think they've cleaned house of some Kool-Aid drinkers. There were 8 that were let go even right before Patel came in. I think that kind of cleared the field for them. I know they're doing vetting of who they're putting into places right now with who's in these divisions. Uh, what would be your answer when people would ask you, would you be similar to what I'm thinking? Is probably a little too early to give them a grade.
I would say it's easy for the peanut gallery to have their positions. I think it's too early to give them a grade. I could say that, hey, between me and you, maybe there's some things I would focus on differently. That's my opinion. That's your opinion, right?
Mhm.
But it's too early to grade them on making strategic and foundational change to an organization as large and powerful and as busy as the FBI. But what I don't like, I'll tell you one thing I don't like, and I think again, their communication strategy, I don't like the apologetic tone sometimes that comes out. I wish they would abandon that apologetic tone. No, we're here. The FBI is on the job. This is the FBI that protected you, your parents, and your grandparents. This is the FBI that's going to protect you, your children, and their children. We're back on the job. Sleep well at night, people. Right? I want to see that assertiveness. I would give them the 180 days minimum before I started trying to assess performance.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, I think it's a little early there, and I
Yeah.
think that um, looking and acting the part is one thing, and that's one recommendation that I gave early with our contact at his
Yeah.
office was
Yeah.
I don't want to see Cash Patel in a polo shirt or cargo pants or anything like that. The dude is the FBI director, unless
Absolutely.
he's going running with a class. Suit is the attire,
Well,
and I
that's
think
the
that needs
yeah.
to be put back out into the field. One of the best ASACs that I worked for, and you probably know him, which was Alex Turner, AJ Turner.
Yes.
AJ, when he was my ASAC, he used to
Yeah.
say, "You better have an excuse to not be in the suit. You're out here at the Tyson's Corner, old Tyson's Corner RA up there on Leesburg Pike. It's an office environment. You got to look the part. You need to look professional. If you're dressed down, you better tell me you just came from the range and you're getting ready to clean up, put your suit back on, because at any moment we could be bringing somebody through the office, and you got to look the part. And I, as someone who's conducted, I can't count how many interrogations and interviews, I always just felt that when I went in dressed professionally and looking the part, that I got more out of that interview and interrogation than anything. Even with the bad guys, the drug and gang members, they understood that the man in the suit is usually the man that's in charge. And when I would walk in, I would hear some of the agents that were trying to adhere to some of the lower quality agents of, oh, well, I'm just in the office today. I'm just going to wear boots and
Right.
cargo pants and stuff. Um, when they would start listening to them, they would say, well, I'd rather walk in and talk to the person, to the gangbanger, and not be as intimidating. I'd be dressed down and it's easier for me to relate with him. No, it's easier for me to start with you from a level of tension and consternation at this level and bring you down than it is for me to start with a lower level and try to bring you up. Uh,
Right.
and I don't just say that because that's what I believe. It's what I experienced. I
No,
for
it's
25 years I
absolutely
did
true.
these interviews and interrogations.
It's absolutely
And I don't
true.
know, maybe that played a role into why I didn't have to testify in court so much. I usually got what I needed out of
Well,
the interrogation.
Chris, you come from the older breed mindset, training, everything else, right? You start out from that position. What do you expect when you see FBI agents? People zipped up tight in suits, capable, competent, squared away, professional, right? The old Friday, damn Friday, just the facts, ma'am, type of thing, right?
Yeah.
You want to see folks that are going to come out, and it's part of that culture that gives you that perceived authority, right? It gives you that credibility when you walk in the room and you're not wearing a fishing jacket or whatever those vests that everybody was wearing for a while, to wear over their guns and all that kind of stuff, right? You walk in the room and, like you said, they kind of say, "Oh, okay, the suits are here," right? And and it changes the atmosphere. But if you're in there dressed like them, and I mean, it's a different type of it's part of the FBI brand too, right? A bunch of folks show up, they're zipped up tight in suits, they look squared away and professional, and they were squared away and professional, and that was the
Yeah.
FBI brand.
And that
So
that was emphasized
yeah,
that was emphasized at the FBI Academy, and I'm pretty confident it was the same training platform that I went through, where you work the big major case dealing with uh, the bomb that was going to go off in DC, and uh, I forget what the name of the case was called. I talked to people that were there way before us that worked the same type of case that you kind of worked as a class. But I remember when we had interview days, there were days that would say the dress of the day is suit, and you wore the suit to conduct your
sure.
interviews and your interrogations. It was part of the training program. Tell us a little bit about your book before we cut off here. Tell
Sure.
me about what was the impetus behind it. What actually does it cover in there? Is it just a how-to guide of how to fix the bureau, or do you give some other things in it?
Well, book was written for a couple of reasons. First, my wife got sick of listening to me complain about things as I watched the news. She goes, "Look, all the things that you talk about and all the things that you were taught by those senior agents, the people who kind of the old FBI dragon slayers, right? If you don't write it down, it's going to go away with you." So I said, "Okay, fair enough." So to stop me from just bending her ear all the time, I started writing a book and putting these lessons that I learned from the old breed of agents into onto paper. So I put the book together as a way to show my journey from joining the FBI in the mid 90s up through when I left it in 2020, how the FBI evolved, how I learned how to be an FBI agent, when I moved into leadership, how I learned how to lead from these people, and how I learned how to do things from that old breed of agent. And then I took them through my time before 9/11 up through my retirement. And then in the second part of the book, I analyze or I give assessments on this is where the FBI ran off track that I watched. I saw this. And here's some examples. I use the Nasser case out in Indianapolis with the Olympic athlete abuse. I use the Durham report for Crossfire Hurricane. I talk about the Marjorie Stoneman shooting situation. These are examples of how symptomatic of how the FBI ran off track. And I use the Marjorie Stoneman thing because hey, I'm gonna eat my own dog food. That was one of my programs that missed that whole thing, right? That phone call from the family member, that was one of my programs. And by the time we got, I was horrified. So, I try to do that. And in the last part of the book, I give my suggestions on, hey, here's how we fix this challenge, where we are now, how the FBI has declined and how it has eroded in certain areas. How do we get back to that FBI that people respect, trust? And you know what? When we show up places, people should be glad that the FBI is there. They should say, thank God they're here, right? And even our state and local partners, they would have the whole stone face, all these feds are here, and then quietly like, hey, we're glad you're here. Right? So
Yeah.
that's what I try to give some suggestions on some areas to focus on and the FBI doesn't have time to take a knee and kind of gather itself as the world becomes more complex and dangerous. They got to do this on the fly, as the Director Patel and Deputy Bongino are doing now. So I wrote the book to put it together. If you read it from front to back, it's just that arc. If you read just the last two sections, it's, hey, this is where we fell off, and here's where we get back on the path.
Okay. Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on this season one, episode one of this podcast.
No,
Again,
pleasure.
it's going to be a mix of things. I've got this little tight group that you know of retired agents, and some of us have done some things in the media, some of us haven't, and we're just looking for an avenue to kind of have these types of conversations that we have in the background. Some of the podcasts are going to be longer, like this one. Some of them are just going to be pretty short, and there may be times that one of the people in my circle says, hey, can I borrow, almost like borrowing the car? Hey, can I borrow the podcast this Saturday? There's something I want to
Right.
cover. So we're going to get an opportunity to put it out there. And eventually we're going to go to a point, once we fine tune it totally, of doing this live stream so we can get the public involved. But thanks again for being on this show. I look forward to interacting with you more. Appreciate the things that you've done. I remember seeing your name out and about, when I was in the bureau, even though I don't think we maybe we passed each other in the hallway and didn't know it. I just don't
If we
recall.
did, yeah, we probably did in some of the circles that you were in and I was in. I'm sure we passed through or sat in the same rooms at times. So
Yeah.
no, pleasure to be with you and your audience. Thanks for letting me contribute to the show, and look forward to working with you and the other, I guess you can say, the other constituents in the future.
Yeah, and I'll disclose who they are. I've got a section before we started this podcast, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Well, thanks again, Chris. I appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we that ends this episode of the Blunt Force Conservative Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. We are going to sign off for now, and we'll get this thing processed and uploaded. It's going to be a podcast that I think probably a lot of people that were in the FBI will get a chance to look at it, and they'll do some head nods, or they may have some questions about things that are they disagree with, and they can send them my way, and we'll get them addressed. If there's people that want to send us recommendations for things that you want to see on the podcast, this is going to be your podcast. This is going to be something. It's going to be driven from what the audience is looking for. So again, my name is Chris Hinkle. I'm a retired FBI agent. I am your blunt force conservative, and I will see you next time.